All right. Are you still all right, Ed, to carry on?
Yeah.
All right. So 1972 was also the year of the miners' strike. If you remember the rank and file led miners' strike.
It was a 71, 72. It started in 71,
Right,
I think,
okay.
and it
Okay.
went over.
Okay. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and what was interesting about that was they developed it was Arthur Scargill, to be fair to him, who I've got a lot of time for in some ways, but was very rigid, and that was his strength. He's unyielding, but ultimately I think he made the wrong move, if such. But I'll give him credit. He was a strong and powerful trade union. If only we'd had him ourselves in 72, we'd have done much, much better. But anyway, so they developed the flying picket, and that was a boon to all of us. Because without the flying pickets, there probably wouldn't have been the picket on the unregistered container depots and so on and so forth. So you see how that thing, and it spread into the building industry, because they had the biggest strike I think they've ever had, and the biggest wage increase they ever had. They subsequently jailed the Shrewsbury pickets, who, and so the state can be very harsh when it does something that you do something they disapprove of. So, but I still think you should do it anyway, because I think, why? How are we going to forward ourselves on if we don't? If we just keep accepting, where would we be? Where would any welfare state be if workers hadn't, risen up, so to speak? That's the only way. People think, oh, you can negotiate my arse. If you've got no tools, nothing behind you to negotiate with, there's nothing to talk about, because the employers will just laugh at you. No, and the government will just laugh, because it is the government of the employers. Anyway, 72, the miners' strike. A wonderful, wonderful victory for them. First strike I think they had and if you remember, part of the problem in the mine industry, and subsequently the loss in the second strike they had in 74, was the power loading agreement they had. And who introduced that but Tony Benn, when he was Minister of Energy, I think it was. And the power loading agreement split the workers there. So, I mean, working coal is, if you're in a new coal seam and a really good coal seam, under the power loading agreement, you could earn bundles of money, because you have to shift more coal but less rubble and stuff, the rest. If you're in a poorer seam, you've got to work twice as hard to get the same money. And so the workers in Yorkshire were in lower seams, and the workers were in Nottinghamshire were in better seams. So the power loading agreement favoured the Nottinghamshire miners, and disfavoured, if you like, the Yorkshire miners. And and that, by introducing that agreement, it split the workers, so that when the Tories built up their stocks of coal and gas and everything else, petroleum, in order to beat the strike, when they decided under the Ridley plan to take them on, with everything they've got, they started by saying they was going to close down some of these seams in Yorkshire, which obviously meant unemployment and falling back and not earning enough money to live properly and all the rest of it. So, because workers are not, they're not, what's the word, smashing the machines up?
Luddites.
Luddites. They're not Luddites. If a job had to be closed down and go to another job, if in the intervening period you were paid the same wages, workers would slip over and it would be a similar thing. But it isn't. If you lose this job, you're paying a mortgage or whatever, your whole life goes down the drain. Surely it's within the realms of sense to create a system where there's a seamless level of employment. Of course it is. This, that can be organised. We're human beings, we can organise it. The only thing that prevents us organising it is the system we live within. It's a class system. It favours the capitalist class. And that's the way they want it. But we have to change it. And so the miners were going to fight back. They knew they'd fight back. And it was a set-up. They deliberately set them back. And then they picketed the Nottinghamshire miners out. And then the hoo-ha goes up in the press and the media. This is outrageous. They shouldn't be allowed to go and picket them out and all the rest of it. Oh, at least draw the pickets off and let them have a vote. Well, of course, that by drawing the pickets off, and this was done by the local trade union official of the miners, and the weakness of the miners has always been, in a sense, in one sense it could be a strength, but in another sense, on occasion like this, could be a trouble, because the miners traditionally were always organised regionally, and so the Scottish miners, the Welsh miners, the Yorkshire miners, and so on and so forth, and they were a federation, but they needed much more centralisation under this. And so the Tories were playing off steelworks. If you had a mine in Scotland, say, part of your job was to feed the local steelworks, that was a big chunk of your employment. The Tories then say, we're going to close the steelworks. They threaten your one to be closed. No, you want to keep it going. So it divides. That's their tactics. Our tactics have to be to stay together, to resist all this stuff. And say, if you close that steelworks, then all the other steelworks will close because he won't feed it with coal anyway. There are things that you can do, but these regional, if you like, trade union officials undermined Scargill, and so did the Labour Party. Has to be said. Kinnock undermined Scargill. That joined with the capitalist press. This is a workers' party. You must be joking. They're not a workers' party. They never have been. In fact, I think when they first come to power in, I think it was 1924, it was as a result of a number of Liberal MPs crossing the floor of the House and joining them and creating the first Labour government. So they've always been Lib Dem, if you like.
Okay, all right. So just let's go back to 72 then for a minute. So do you remember Saltley Gates then? The Battle of Saltley Gates?
Yeah, I never went to Saltley Gates. Yeah. I did go to Mansfield and a few other places, which I, of course, I'll describe what we did in the dock when the mines were on strike. I mean, especially the 74 strike. I was at Tilbury then.
Right.
They came to picket. The power station in Tilbury, and they camped out just opposite our dock. And the first thing I went over there and I said to them...
Is this 74 or 84?
74.
74.
Oh, no, 84.
84.
84, sorry. 84. Yeah. I introduced myself. I was a shop steward, and I said, look, if you if you need any food and that, you come in our dock and we'll get you some and that, you know, and I'll take you around the dock and introduce you to the blokes and because you might need us in solidarity. Subsequently I found that someone had popped in. Now most of these blokes were young. They hadn't even been involved in the 71-72 strike. These were young miners. And I was also joined a committee in support of the miners. We used to meet in Barking Polytechnic, and so and we put up, me and Barbara put up, I think it was about 5 miners during there. And subsequently I used to take them round to all the various ports where they were importing all the coal, showing them where the ports were and everything. And anyway, these, I was told after I'd left these young miners that someone had come in, an official had come in and told Satan, we're not, you know, and all that. So, and then we joined the demonstrations and the pickets outside the power stations and everything.
Was that Tilbury Power Station?
Tilbury, yeah.
Oh right, okay.
And so they were getting somewhere. They were going to close that. And then I'm on the committee in the Barking Poly, and it comes up they're going to draw the pickets off because they're going to take them up. I said, this is bloody madness. We're just on the point of shutting this place, and you're drawing the pickets off. You know. Then I was told by someone, what's it got to do with us? What's it got to do with me? This is a minor official type of thing. What's it got to do with me? I said, I'm invested in this strike. I want this strike to win. That's what it's got to do with me. I don't want to see it lose. Anyway, so there were problems.
Why do you think that happened? Why did they do that, the officials?
You see, as I said to you, it wasn't a centralised. It's what it should have been. It's the control of it. It was much more federated, if you like, and loose. And people, I don't know. I've no doubt the Communist Party was meeting and discussing the strike and the tactics of the strike, or its members for the tactics of the strike. I'm sure we were meeting, obviously, as the SWP. I think we were the SWP. I'm not quite sure whether we were. But in any event, we certainly discussed the strike and how the strike could win. Because we wanted it to bloody win, you know. And unfortunately, through the use of the police, the terror tactics, I mean, me and Barbara used to drive up to Cumbria and we would see these police. They were all these 12-seater type vans, thousands of them. You're not talking. The cost was phenomenal to pay the Metropolitan Police and other police forces. Huge costs, all paid for out the oil money, which now we don't see a ton of. All we're paying is extra money for the oil. We've got oil on our doorstep, but we're paying through the nose for the oil because we're fixed at the world price. As capitalism, that's the way capitalism's organised, so they can siphon all the fruits off for themselves. And so, yeah, and subsequently, you know, unfortunately, after a valiant struggle, they got defeated. I mean, by the whole state.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we just go back again to so from the 70s to the 80s. Now the SWP leadership at the time came up with the thesis called the downturn thesis, didn't it? The idea, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea that there was a shift in the balance of class power and industry. Is that right, in that period?
Yeah.
And that there was less willingness to struggle amongst the rank and file. What happened, do you think, in that period to cause that to come about?
Well, obviously, What period are we talking about
So,
now?
so from between the coming to power of the Wilson-Callaghan government 74
Yeah.
and
Oh,
Thatcher
well,
79.
Well, obviously, we're talking about the social contract, or the social contract, as they like to describe it. You know, they give these words fancy names by fancy French philosophers, but in truth, they're devious. They hide behind these things, and what it appears to be isn't what it is. It's a sleight of hand, and subsequently workers come to understand it as it was a social contract. In other words, if our wages are held back, that somehow there'll be a recovery and we'll all benefit from it. No, that's not how it works. You know, the fact, what we're dealing with here is insatiable capitalism. If you give it an inch, it'll take a mile. There's never any, you know, we're described in the press and on the organs that we're greedy workers, greedy this and greedy that, greedy dockers. Greedy dockers? We live in the East End. If we was greedy, really greedy like they were, we wouldn't be living in the East End. We'd be living in Knightsbridge, wouldn't we? If you want to look at the society that we live in, well, have a walk around Knightsbridge, and then have a walk around, I don't know, Aspatria, where Barber comes from, little town in the north, you know, the northwest, or Workington. Workington, what a misnomer that is, a working town. Except the unemployment levels a lot higher usually there than any other places, you know. The whole of the country is given this gloss that it doesn't really deserve about I mean, take the NHS, which is a wonderful thing as a concept, but in delivery terms, at the moment, it is shit. It is absolute shit, right? Now, Labour takes credit for that, for the, you know, fulfilling the Beveridge report, which was a Liberal thing. You know, in the war they're going, oh, after the war we'll all work together, we'll all be not, people won't have to deserve all this crap they had in the 30s and all the rest of it. There's all this aspiration, you know, the aspirational thing that they're always engineering. But in truth, and to some extent it did occur, largely because of the full employment after the war, you know, the growing employment gave workers more power. But as the system inevitably moves into its inner contradictions and you know, it can't function without there being some sort of crisis, you know, of unemployment, or as we're going through at the minute, inflation or whatever. It's crisis-ridden, the whole system, and so it's always trying to negotiate around the crisis. And the capitalist class is always trying to negotiate the crisis and still retain its money worth. You know, it's worth in pounds and the rest of it, and so it wants to emerge out of the crisis when it's fully loaded, but the crisis is paid for by the lowest sections of the society. They really get it on the end, and so that's the system we live in. We need to change it, don't we? So getting back to where
social contract,
where
social contract.
The social contract obviously had a diminishing effect on as shop stewards, as workers, to try and organise. You know, because it for most people it seems to make some sense. We make a bit of a sacrifice now to benefit later on, but in truth it never works that way. And
so did some workers try to take unofficial action? You know, against it, and then did it bring them into conflict with other workers? Is that what happened?
Well, in our strike in the 70s, 72, about, obviously, it's strange because I first joined the Communist Party in well, what was known then, when I joined, known as Briggs Motor Bodies, which subsequently became part of Fords. And it was a very militant section. I joined the Communist Party there. And one of the blokes I was there at, subsequently, and who was also in the Communist Party, nice fella, when we had our issues about unregistered container depots and that, we went to one in Dagenham, and by now he'd left Falls and he was working in this unregistered container depot, which we were picketing, and he was on the other side of the picket. And he said to me, he said, "God, this is a situation, Ed, you know." Because when we were at Fords, we were in strikes in Fords, and suddenly we were on the opposite side of the fence. But we're not, because our argument wasn't with the workers there. It was never with the workers. In fact, we insisted that at the end of the dispute, these workers be employed in our industry, and that they should receive the same wages we received, because they weren't receiving the same wages. That was part of the plan to undermine our wages. So we were always on the side of the workers, although the press made it appear that we were against the other work. They like to set worker against. It's not. It wasn't like that at all. We fully understood the motives of the employers to get cheap labour. Well, we was anxious to make our labour expensive, like that, and their labour expensive as well.
Okay, all right. And so then Thatcher came to power in 1979.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do, and it's obviously. Oh, I'll give you a little story. Before, when she was first elected to as the Tory leader, she started going around the country. And at the time, there was an election going on, the John Stonehouse constituency in oh God, not Wolverhampton. What was it? Oh, anyway. And I went up there for a week because our party was standing a candidate. Our candidate was Paul Foot. And so I went up there for a week to help out with the election. Never worked so hard politically in the whole of my life, you know. I mean, this was our routine. We'd get up in the morning, we'd go straight out to a factory sale. We'd do a factory sale, because workers were going to work. We'd sell the paper, talk about the election, with a megaphone, etc. And we'd go back after the workers had gone in the factories. We'd leave that. We'd go back, have our breakfast. Then we'd go out at dinner time and do a town centre sale with the megaphone and all the rest of it. On the night time, we'd go around the estates, knocking on doors, selling the paper, talking to people about the election and stuff. And then in addition, we'd have meetings, local meetings. Our problem was that we never had any cater in the area. I think the nearest branch was Wolverhampton. And it was Walsall. Anyway, while we were there, word came out that Thatcher was going to visit the constituency, because obviously the Tories had a candidate. She was going to visit the constituency. So we had a meeting we sat in the front room of this house that we rented and discussed how we was going to handle her coming up. And we, what I said, well, what we need someone inside Tory HQ. So I said, what we need to do is get, now, there was only one bloke there, it could be. This is a bloke called Rick Noss. I'll never forget him. I don't know whatever happened to Rick Noss, but he had a very nice posh accent. I said, it's got to be you. I mean, I'm never going to pass, am I? You know, they're not going to believe me. So Rick went up to the local Tories, said he was up from Kent visiting his girlfriend, and that he'd heard and he was a member of the Tories, and that he'd heard about the election. He thought, while I'm up here, I can help out in the election. So he sat down, sticking stickers and envelopes and whatever, listening to the gossip. And he found out exactly where Thatcher was going in every place. So every time Thatcher went somewhere, because we'd chase her with a megaphone. In the end, they were trying to hit us with their bleeding umbrellas and things like that, you know. It was hilarious. And they must have thought, how the bleeding hell they find out? How they know? You know, but yeah. we did. So we had all sorts of little stunts, and also we decided to streamline a bit, and we'd have a team, because the National Front had posters going up, and so we had a team going around taking their posters down, putting our posters up, you know, and things like that.
And that's the time that the National Front had become very strong.
Yeah.
Is that right? National?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so were you involved in the campaign to stop their growth?
Well, only through the party, yeah, obviously. Well, how that started, I think, they got a really good election result in London. In the London elections, they pushed Liberals into 4th place. So it was an obvious concern. And as I didn't make the decisions, but Paul Holborough was given the job of opening an office, and Cliff managed to contact a number of Jewish businessmen, people who were concerned, obviously, about the rise of the extreme right, for some funds to open an office and to build the anti-Nazi League. And Paul Holborough was central to that. And I have to say, Paul, he was a really brave bastard. You know, I mean, he was obviously a public school boy and all the rest of it, but there was a still behind him that was good. He was very, very, and also he was a really excellent organiser. And so then Roger Huddle and Red Saunders got together and started off the Anti-Nazi League and drew us all in.
Rock Against Racism.
Pardon?
Rock Against
Racism, sorry. Yeah. And the first Rock Against Racism was at Forest Gate in a pub, above the pub, the Princess Alice. And I think, what's her name? Carol Grimes was the artist who did our first gig. And it grew. And, I mean, Roger and company did wonderful things out of the paper. Roger's working at the paper. They were designing all this gear, the badges, you know, and it really, I mean, when we got to Victoria Park, I remember they said the stage is going to be attacked. There's been a report that the National Front are going to attack the stage and smash it up before it can happen. So some of us had to stay behind and mind the stage, and because we didn't know what the march was like, we were all wondering. We're standing there waiting and waiting and waiting, bored out of our head, just waiting. And then the march started to arrive, and we could not believe the numbers. It was just phenomenal. 80,000 people. It was packed out. And I'll never forget it, because we got the job in the... Some went to the stage to act as people, stopping people getting on the stage and that. We were given the job of in the sound studio top thing that was in front of the stage, way back a bit. But we had the best view in the house of that. And I'll never forget, because I was with a bloke called John Lindsay, who was a party member, and he was gay, and he had been a sergeant in the South African Army. I think he's a professor now. And when Tom Robinson came out and said glad to be gay, John Lindsay was crying his eyes out. I'll never forget, it was a very emotional moment, obviously much more emotional for him than it was for me, but it was still an emotional moment. It was just a magic kind of day, really, altogether.
So did you think that had a role in defeating the NF?
Oh yeah, because our party used to, if you were a party inside London, we all had to go on a Sunday, because the National Front used to organise a paper sale down at Brick Lane. So every Sunday we all had to go to Brick Lane, and so we would gather there and stop them from selling their paper of hate. I mean, we've got nothing against the Labour Party or even the Tories. We wouldn't attack them, but for the NF, no, that's different, because their aim is to build up the streets and gain power through the streets and smash us off the streets, and we've got to kill it before it kills us. And also, on the Saturdays, when they had paper sales on the Saturdays, I remember being in Barking, and then we used to have several different paper sales throughout East London, and then we used to, every now and again, one of the paper sales would get attacked by the National Front. So we decided to have build up several carloads of people, so that if the front showed up, say they showed up in Walthamstow, we'd all shoot over to Walthamstow, or if they showed up Barking, we'd shoot at Barking, where Forest Gate, we'd shoot, so it went on. So that way we were able to reinforce whoever was under attack, you know.
Right, okay. All right then, so getting back to Thatcher then. So she came to power in 1979. Did that feel like, at the time, did it feel like a turning point? Did it feel like a continuity? Looking back on it, what did it feel like?
Well, obviously we knew what was coming, because your speeches you was making. We knew what she was about. And of course, you know, well, we saw the miners' strike in '84, but before that, we saw all the sell-off of the public utilities, the usual one. The pretense that the public utilities weren't efficient enough, they'd be better off in private hands, and so on. Now have a look at the water now, currently. All the water companies, the privately owned water companies, emptying their rubbish into rivers and seas and the rest of it, pollution everywhere, because it's cheaper to do it that way. It's cheap for them, it's expensive for the society, but cheap for them. And so it goes on. And you know, these oil companies, we used to have we used to run the oil companies. Not all the oil companies, but you know, I think BP, British Petroleum, was state owned. Now the oil companies charge what they like. You know, they charge the world price, as they say. You know, and so it goes on. So you've got no control over anything. The British people, or ordinary working class people in particular, they have no say, they have no recourse. It's just there, it's given to them. They have to accept it, or else they have to fight. And of course, it's not easy to keep fighting. It's not easy. You've got to have a certain kind of spirit in order to do it. But I tell you what, you don't half feel good when you do and you succeed. It's gratifying to feel you know you can achieve through your tactics and your organisation. You can succeed in pushing these things back.
There was a dispute that I forgot to mention. I just wanted to ask you about briefly. Was Grunwicks? Do you remember Grunwicks?
I do. We used to go down there quite a lot. We met the women, and I can't remember the name of there was a minister, Tory, who used to go down there trying to...
Really?
Yeah. I can't remember his name now. Any event, we used to say, we'd take a notice that sod, you know, like... And we were there the particular day when it was a mass picket to stop the buses going in to try and break the strike. And there were thousands of people there, and the police, there were about a big contingent of police horseback riders, and they came down. We've got our banner, Bob's up the other end, I'm here with a banner, and the officer in charge was obviously in the middle of the section, but when they got down to near where the crowd were, they stopped, and he pulled his horse out and he rode it on, sort of indicating they should charge into the crowd, right? But as he's charged forward, and before they could follow him, someone from the crowd, I don't know who it was, but they grabbed him by the boot out of the stirrup and threw him straight off the horse. He had one of those big telephones, those huge bloody things that they used to have years ago, you know, and it clattered off, and he's trying to grab his phone, and he was aware that he was now vulnerable off his horse on his own, and he was trying to get his horse, he was panicking. And then they rode their horses up, and the horse was just above our heads, you know, but the crowd never moved. Anyway, they drove a car at the crowd next to us, and then someone has put a brick through the window of the car. Now they're panicking inside. They're now thinking the crowd's going to... anyway, so we stopped the pickets. Wonderful. We've stopped them, right?
Stop the vans going in?
Stop the vans going in.
Right,
they can't go in.
Right.
And then Jack Droney, member of the Communist Party at the time, he wasn't an official of the union, I don't think, at that time, but he had called a march, and we realised that this bloody march was going to call all the bleeding mass pickets off the bloody picket. It was an absolute bloody complete and utter mistake. We could have stopped them going in, but no, he called it off in his bloody wisdom, or lack of, and they ended up going in. It's mad, it's completely mad. I was kind of, I felt sorry. Another day, we was there, and we're in a crowd, the police are there, bit of a battle going, bit of a thing, and then someone threw a bottle into the police. And so we said, we grabbed round this bloke, we said, "Oi, who are you? Who are you?" And so we said, "You got any identification?" And he went to put his hand in his pocket, and then he rushed out and ran, and we chased him. We chased him, and he jumped on one of the coppers' buses. They had these little green buses, single-decker bucket buses, and he jumped on. So obviously he was a copper. He was an agent provocateur, you know, and we'd caught him, you know.
Wow.
So that just shows you what goes on as well.
Yeah. So the strike itself was led by a group of Asian women.
Women, yeah.
Well, yeah. So
Mrs. What was her
Desai,
name?
was it Mrs. Desai? Desai.
Desai, that's
Yeah.
it, Mrs. Desai.
So was
Wonderful woman, like a great class fighter.
Fantastic, yeah. So, but it's interesting. It was the same time when the National Front was at its height, but there was mass support for a strike by a group of Asian women workers.
Yeah, I think that played a significant. I mean, in the latest sort of survey that we've got, it shows that racism, in a sense, is like the more people are much more open, much more accepting of people who are different to themselves. Of course, we know that can be manipulated by the other side. Because they use racism as a lever to split the working class. So Mrs. Desai was in a way our lever to unite the working class. You know that. I think that's how it works. You know, and so suddenly people think that they're not here just to steal our jobs. They're here to fight for better wages and conditions. They're just like us. And I think that works in reverse to racism. And bloody good job it does as well, you know.
Okay. So was anti-racism, was it carried into the trade union movement after that? You know, did anti-racism become part of the trade union movement, would you say?
Well, it has, but at different times, you know, there are times. I mean, for example, it's not that they're a different race per se. I'm thinking of Jews in the 30s, in 1936 in particular. You know, when the Mosley was marches and the rest of it, and Dockers came out to support Jews in the struggle against Mosley. These are, when I say Dockers, and yet they marched in favour of a later date. It just shows you how things can move and shift. And unless you've got the organisation to combat it, these things go unchallenged. And so that's why we're organised politically in the way we are. You know, we obviously need more people, because the more people we could do a better job. I mean, we're a party of a few thousand people, and yet we've got our own paper. The Labour Party was a party of 500,000, you know, until recently. Probably 400, 300 odd thousand now. But they haven't got a paper, have they? How badly organised are they? You know, they sold their paper, the Daily Herald, became the Sun. You know, so it's really important to have people politically, and and you know, when we think of Wilson, in 1966, his motives were, he described the seamen's rank and file leaders, because there was a streamer strike, he described them as politically motivated people. Bloody good job, we have got politically motivated people in the working class. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more bloody racism, you know, and it's a sad that more people ain't politically motivated because Wilson is, but in the wrong way, and so is Starmer, and you know they're politically motivated, but they want personal power. They don't want to change the world. They want to change their world. They're not the whole world, but we want to change the bloody world.
So it takes me back to the question of why you left the Communist Party then, and why you joined the IS.
Well, as I say, I'd had a disquiet. I mean, Czechoslovakia, for example. I have to say I benefited from being a member of the Communist Party.
Sorry, I think Barbara's at the door.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, politically I did benefit because the Communist Party introduced me to Marx, Engels, Lenin, well, he didn't introduce me to Trotsky, that came later. But, you know, but they were my introduction, so they gave me a foundation in understanding how the economy works through Marx and so on and so forth. So, of course, then I hadn't read about what Cliff called state capitalism then, but, although latterly I did, and I'll talk about that. Anyway, so, and then with the invasion of, and subsequent, if you like, dispute between the Sino-Soviet dispute, I was on the London District Committee of the Communist Party at that time. There were a couple of things that really occurred to me then. Was the Sino-Soviet dispute was still being poo-pooed by the leadership at the time, even though I was on the London District Committee. We were privy to the real facts. I think the Observer was running stories about the Sino-Soviet, that they were disputing that. Subsequently, it turned out the Observer was right, although I don't trust the Observer, because it's literally run by MI5 and MI6. But in any event, I was having a sense of disquiet over Czechoslovakia 68, if you remember, when Soviet forces entered Czechoslovakia, and so on and so forth. Now, so I remember having a discussion with Jackie Dash about this, and so disagreeing with him about it. Although I respected him in many ways and liked him as a person. But then, as I say, we got this British Road to Socialism, and it became clear that they were moving away from Marxism, that they were believing that you could change the system within our current society through reforms, and that was a lie, and that this was never going to happen, and you know. I mean, Kinnock people like that, they would describe us as dreamers. But without, if you have to have a vision in your head of the future society. You have to have some concept, otherwise no point in moving from A to B. So, but obviously a lot of people need a lot of stepping stones to get there. But clearly the Communist Party was not, it seems to me, the future. And I'm looking for something, although I never shifted until I found. And it was as a result of the 1972 strike that at the end of it, I went to a meeting before Christmas, I think it was, in 72, where Tony Cliff spoke, and 5 of us joined. I joined there. some of the things he said struck me straight away. I can't remember all he said, but the way he described the party, that that if the party fails, then we have to scrap it and start again. You know, that in other words, there's no fetish about the party in the way there is in state capitalist parties.
I think
You know,
that was-
probably them.
Sorry, Barbara.
That's all.
I've made some lunch.